And so climate anxiety in general is anxiety about the impacts of climate change. And sometimes that can be sort of general existential fears, what's going to happen, an existential threat to humanity, to the world, those kind of things. But where I see clinically this sort of thing come up, and I suspect you may as well, is in the context of OCD and scrupulosity, secular scrupulosity, where people then their obsessions can latch on to things like whether or not they're contributing in a negative way to or responsible in some way for negative climate-related impacts, whether they're doing enough to remediate, to encourage other people to, and those sorts of things. So clinically, I see it more in the context of OCD, actually.
Okay. And how, for people who aren't as familiar with this, we don't have a subtype yet of climate OCD, but how might the obsessions appear and what might be some compulsions that folks might have around this if it does go more into the OCD realm?
Yeah, I think some examples that would be pretty typical might be really excessive and rigid efforts to and lots of obsessional concerns about whether the person is recycling everything that's recyclable. Sometimes compulsions, not just for themselves, but people walking down the street and have the need, I guess, to go pick up anything on the ground, in the street, in the gutter that could be recycled. And I think that those are some pretty common or variations on those, or some pretty common versions of it.
And do you see a lot of worry about the future that many of the young people on college campuses have now in terms of what the climate will be like for them as they get older, or even for their children or grandchildren, and what we're leaving for people?
Yeah, a lot of that, and it's complicated because it's a situation that's a little hard to figure out exactly what the right dose of anxiety about those things would be. Right there, from a public health standpoint, you need people to take this seriously and people to be inspired to try to come up with solutions of all sorts. And in some ways, this is true of all kinds of scrupulosity, and here not just scrupulosity, where something can be somewhat values consistent, but somebody can be stuck going way overboard with it or being incredibly rigid about it. And what got us thinking, us meaning my students along with me, what got us thinking about what might contribute to climate change is a little bit of that tension. There are things that are the usual suspects that create and maintain anxiety, and they're really, it's like really fertile ground for those things in the context of climate change. Stuff like uncertainty, difficulty with uncertainty. And no matter what no matter how much you read in terms of the science of climate change, no matter how much you sort of believe in the issue as something that's worth paying attention to, nobody has a clue exactly what's going to happen when. So there's a tremendous amount of uncertainty, and there are really high stakes. So if something is all else equal, if it's a really huge threat, obviously that's going to contribute to more anxiety, and this could be a catastrophe. So just in terms of catastrophizing and that sort of way of thinking.
Sure.
So there are a lot of the usual suspects that contribute probably to all kinds of anxiety, and it's very easy for them to latch on to this theme. But I say that to introduce that there are some that are not the usual suspects. And you brought up things like, wanting to leave the planet or leave things better for future generations. And so there's this construct called generativity. And generativity.
Okay.
Yeah, it basically refers to the desire to leave a legacy, to leave things better for your kids, that sort of thing. And it's often thought about in the context of people getting older and sort of over the developmental lifespan, and it's usually associated with positive things. So as people are getting older, they're focused more on their legacy, what they're going to leave behind, how they're going to leave things for people, and usually more of that comes along with less anxiety and less depression. And here with climate anxiety, we have an interesting case where being very concerned about the legacy that you leave and how you're going to leave things for future generations might contribute to more climate anxiety. And in fact, those are some of the things that we were studying and found evidence for.
Interesting. So obviously a lot more to learn in this topic. It's being pretty new in terms of how we're studying it from a psychological point of view. I know so much time and effort has been spent on atmospheric studies or various things, but it is interesting to take a look at how is this going to affect the mental well-being of the people affected by it as well.
Yeah, exactly. And again, it's all about dosing it right. There can be things that are important to you and that you want to work on better. Maybe character traits about yourself. Maybe things you want to be better as a friend and a family member, and all kinds of things. But you have to be able to sometimes set that aside and focus on other things and not be consumed by it always, and be able sometimes to bend the rules appropriately, at least, just to function well. And and so, like with other kinds of, and that's why I think of it as similar to scrupulosity in some ways, where somebody may have a values consistent urge to have a relationship with God if it's religious, or to be a better person, work on improving themselves. But sometimes you need to be able to focus on other things, and sometimes you need to be able to put those real desires and real goals and values on the side, and that flexibility can get. People can miss that flexibility sometimes here.
And one last thing on this topic before we switch into more scrupulosity work, but are there strategies so far that you've identified that can help people deal with this anxiety around climate issues?
So I can't speak from data. We haven't evaluated any sort of strategies. But I would think it's similar ones to how we would help somebody who's stuck with other sorts of scrupulosity or again, values related anxiety.